Today's project is this 7-drawer dresser that I found at a garage sale for a mere $40. And I decided to go back to the basics to show everybody how easy it is to restyle a piece of furniture with simple tools and paint. So this time around, I'm actually going to be brushing it on with a paintbrush. And I'm going to be using a paint that's new to me that is supposed to respond beautifully when hand painted. So I'm curious to know if the finish is going to be as luxurious as if I had sprayed the piece. So we're going to find that out together. So sit back and enjoy. As usual, it was vacuumed to get rid of cobwebs and dust. Then it was cleaned with Dawn dish detergent and warm water and then rinsed with clean, fresh water. When that was done, I was able to bring it indoors. And now it's time to start updating the base. I would not suggest RIOB. I think it's level. I'm glad I thought to check how thick each foot was because one of them did have to be trimmed a little bit more, but I think this looks pretty good. Now, when I put my first coat of primer or paint on, then I'll be able to see it better to see if any of it needs to be sanded more level or whatnot. The little divots on the legs will be filled with Bondo, so they'll be smooth. So I think this looks much better and much more on trend than it did before. Now the top 3 drawers will be getting knobs instead of handles. So using the existing holes, I made a template to figure out exactly where that center mark would be. That mark that I made with the nail will show through the paint down the road when I'm ready to drill for that knob. Now that that's done, I need to fill in those hardware holes on the top drawers as well as some other areas, and I'm going to be using Bondo, a 2-part epoxy. I always set aside 2 different little separate piles, only mixing one at a time, because Bondo dries very quickly, and this just saves me time later on. I'll mix up one of those little piles, use it, and then mix up the other as needed. Now this stuff is stinky, so that's why I have the window open with a fan directing the air outdoors and why I'm wearing my respirator. Now I like using this interface foam pad on my rotary sander. It helps me sand the sides of the drawers and whatnot without ruining those edges.
I'm starting with 120 grit sandpaper and then moving on to 220. And later on you're going to notice when I start sanding some of that Bondo, that actually needed 80 grit. This drawer has no repairs. I'm simply scuff sanding with the 220. Scuff sanding is really important. It makes these micro scratches in the surface, which helps the primer and or the paint grab onto the piece. So it's a very quick process. I'm simply scratching the top. I'm not actually sanding down to raw wood. Now whenever you're sanding wood filler or Bondo, all that should be visible when you're done is exactly the holes you're filling. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a ghost of Bondo that's still there that I will need to finish sanding in just a little bit. But I could tell that there were little tiny little holes that I needed to fill, and I'm using plastic wood, which is a wood filler that's much easier to sand than the Bondo. When that dries, I'll go back to that and sand everything smooth. Now I got a little Bondo in that groove of the base, so I took out my contour pads, wrapped a piece of sandpaper around it, and sanded that out. I needed to scuff sand that little area anyway, so I just ran that sand pad, wrapped around the contour pad all the way down the base. Now this top is solid wood, as you can see from the back as well as the side. If you see wood grain like that running all the way down the side, you know that the top piece is solid. It was at this point that I decided that I was just going to sand that down and stain it. So I grabbed my carbide scraper, which makes very quick work. Now the carbide scraper does take a little bit of practice, and one thing I've learned the hard way is that when you're scraping off the finish on the edge like that, you have to be very careful. It's easy for that tool to slip off the edge and gouge the wood. I find this very satisfying. I just love to watch it. I'm just going to show you a tidbit of it in case you like it too. On the edges, you just give some quick little scrapes on the edge to remove it, and you keep going. And if you notice, I am doing this in the direction of the wood grain. Very, very important. And look at this, very satisfying too. I love that. I'm such a goober. Now that I've scraped all that I can, I'm going to sand the remainder. The following day, I switched to a 220 grit to do that final sanding on the top. Isn't that grain beautiful? Once that was done, I went back to scuff sanding the whole piece with 220. I even had to do a little bit of hand sanding to reach those little areas. Now I'm using a gel stain to stain the top. A gel stain is different than regular stain in that it sits on the top. I don't know if you need to stir it. The can didn't indicate, but I stirred it anyway. Now you apply it in the direction of the wood grain with a cloth, just like I'm doing here, or it says you can use a brush. But I did it in sections at first, grabbed a clean white rag and in the direction of the wood grain, wiped off the excess. And then I realized, nah, I'm just going to apply the gel stain on the entire surface before I start wiping it back. It went very, very quickly, and I ended up doing 2 coats of this. I put on the second coat the following day. It's an oil-based product, so you do have to give it ample time to thoroughly dry.
So as you can see, The dresser and the drawers are now primed, and I used a tinted version of Sticks, and I tinted it because I figured I would eventually be painting it a darker color. What I didn't know at the time that I was priming it was that I would eventually end up deciding to use Melange Paint 1. Now this paint is known for having a built-in primer and built-in top coat, so had I known that I would be using this paint, I wouldn't have bothered priming it. Now I am curious to know how it will perform on a piece that isn't primed, so I found this drawer. I'm going to paint the front of this drawer too, just to compare it to the finish I get on a piece that is primed.
Now if you'll notice, I'm starting by applying the paint in the center of the drawer and then brushing out to each end. That way you eliminate the risk of paint pooling up at the edge. And once that was applied, I lightly brushed on the top to smooth it all out, and then I left it alone to self-level. This paint is glorious. And they are right. It goes on beautifully with a brush.
It's been a couple of days. I wanted to show you what the first coat looks like. You can see what looks like brushstroke marks, and they may be. I think more likely they are just the fact that when you put on your first coat of paint, you don't get full coverage. But we'll see. So let's take a look at all of these. This is the drawer I used just as a test. I'm not using this, so I didn't bother filling it, but this was the drawer that I painted that had not been primed. And on the first coat, let's give it a scratch test. Look at that. Not primed. And it is sticking. Way to go, Melange 1. Fantastic. I'm putting on the second coat of paint, and what I'm doing today is really loading up my brush and applying it to the piece, then smoothing it out and then leaving it alone and not overworking it. I want to leave it alone when it's still very wet so that it has time to self-level.
And once again, I'm starting in the center of the drawer and then painting out. Y'all, this color is called Oak Moss, I believe. It dries darker and it is absolutely beautiful. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with my channel, I use all the proceeds of my furniture sales and that I get from YouTube to pay off the principal of our mortgage. We want to retire mortgage free, and so your support of this channel has helped immensely. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and leave me a comment below. I really enjoy answering all of them.
This is the self-adjusting hardware that I got, and I've used this once before. It came up to $2.86 each. I had 4 more in this box, so I was in luck. That's what I needed. Each one comes all wrapped up together, and what's in each of those packages is the hardware itself, and this alley on the back side will Very important, and you'll see why in just a moment. That's what makes this adjustable. It comes with 2 screws that always have to trim, 2 washers, 2 nuts, and then this is a nifty little device to tighten it. And this is how you use them. You put them in backwards, like that. Then you add the washers. And these little nuts, but you don't tighten them all the way. And then this is why it's important that this hardware has this little alley here, because you simply, and this is why you don't tighten the screws all the way on the inside, you simply thread it through both of the screws. Cut. And once you have it centered, with this tool, you tighten the nuts in place. Then I like to make sure they're level. And that one is very good.
I used Gilboy's hard wax oil to seal the top. You do have to stir it very, very well. But y'all, I have discovered this is the best product to put on top of wood in particular, because you don't run any risk of streaking or brush stroke marks. It's glorious. This is a very durable finish when it dries. It's both water and heat resistant. It's even safe on toys if you make toys. But you apply it sparingly with a cloth or a brush, and then you wait 8 hours before a second coat, which I did put on. I put on a total of 2 coats. Now let's look back at what this piece looked like when I picked it up from that garage sale. I had a lot of interest on this dresser for nurseries, and ultimately that's what it was purchased for. I love the way it turned out. Give me your feedback as to what you think.